The day had been a carefully assembled lie. It was a crisp, golden Tuesday in Vermont. The maple trees around our craftsman house were ablaze in a spectacular, yet utterly deceptive autumn flourish. I was Mary Jane Thompson, 38, a successful landscape architect whose life rested on principles of structural integrity and flawless design. I had believed my marriage to Jack Thompson, a charismatic executive at Innovate, was built the same way. My obsession with outward perfection had, ironically, blinded me to the rot beneath. Lately, Jack's habit of furtive phone calls and frequent, critical business trips had become a dull, persistent anxiety, a low hum I chose to ignore. That afternoon, the illusion didn't break with a shout, but with the surgical calm of a child's question. Eliza, my 6-year-old, perched on the imported Italian marble counter while I wrestled with soil samples and a thorny design problem. "Mommy," Eliza said, her big earnest eyes carrying the weight of an unwelcome truth, "why does Aunt Lisa smell exactly like Daddy's most expensive cologne? The one he keeps hidden in his dressing room safe." Aunt Lisa, Susan Miller, my closest friend, my college confidant, a woman I had trusted more than kin. The shock hit like paralysis. The carton of organic milk slipped from my fingers and a slow, viscous, cold river of white poured across the immaculate marble. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the lye pooling on the floor. "When precisely did you see Susan, Eliza?" I asked in an unnaturally low, clinical monotone, a defense against the panic choking my chest. "She was giving him a hug yesterday. A very, very long, funny hug," Eliza clarified. "Jack was supposed to be in Chicago. He was taking a bath and she was standing right there by the clear glass door laughing. They both had those new thick white hotel towels wrapped around them when they hugged goodbye." The evidence accumulated into an undeniable truth. The rare cologne on her, the shared intimacy of the bathroom, and those distinctive Willow Sweet hotel towels I'd seen him buy online months before, a detail that confirmed a shared encounter, not an accidental crossing. My marriage wasn't merely damaged, it had been obliterated. The next hour I spent in a hyper-focused denial, cleaning the spill until the marble gleamed with cold perfection. I did not cry. My grief transmuted immediately into crystalline strategy. When Jack came home near midnight, his movements were guarded, his excuses layered and unconvincing. He carried the faint odor of desperation and corporate soap. I noticed a small, fading scratch near his collarbone, a detail that haunted the edges of my awareness. I poured him his bourbon and met his gaze with a thin, brittle smile that gave nothing away. In that instant, the love I'd held for him didn't turn to hate. It simply evaporated, leaving a cold, hard vacuum of professional necessity. I decided my response would not be an emotional outburst but a planned, total, systemic termination of the life I had known with him. The only acceptable path forward was absolute, irreversible victory. First, I had to map the full extent of the structural damage before I began demolition. My initial descent into the digital underworld was agonizing and decisive. I waited until the house was utterly silent, the grandfather clock in the hall amplifying the gravity of the betrayal, then retrieved a specialized kit I'd procured weeks earlier for a theoretical corporate espionage project for a wealthy client. Using my knowledge of network topology, I installed an advanced, undetectable keylogger on Jack's secondary work laptop. This malware was engineered not just to record keystrokes, but to bypass encryption and recover permanently deleted files, guaranteeing a complete forensic capture of communications, financial transactions, and location data for the past 6 months. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about assembling evidence for a total prosecution. I needed to know who was implicated, how much it had cost, and what corporate vulnerabilities they'd exposed. My pain became fuel for a meticulous, cold-blooded investigation. Eliza's innocent face was my compass. What he didn't know was that I had already created a ghost profile on a dark web forum, using professional contacts to initiate an untraceable inquiry into the corporate filing status of an obscure LLC that owned a boutique hotel 40 meters away, circumventing local legal defenses. The morning after the revelation, my new life as a professional investigator began. I had also established a perfect alibi, a massive, demanding, multi-phase project in Boston's financial district that required long hours and frequent overnight stays. A lie that protected my every move. Predictably, Jack showed great enthusiasm for the lucrative new project and the boost it promised to our social standing. His vanity was my most reliable ally. My main target was his corporate tablet, carelessly abandoned on the nightstand, a symbol of his arrogant belief in my domestic ignorance. Once I bypassed its weak security, I ignored the text messages, assuming they were already sanitized, and went straight to the financial and geographical data linked to his high-limit corporate expense card. The data wasn't chaotic, it was disturbingly clear, a precise map of systematic corporate fraud. Jack had been fabricating elaborate cross-country business trips to justify his absences and lavish spending. The proof was irrefutable. High-cost overnight flight reservations to major tech hubs, San Francisco, Dallas, were consistently and quietly canceled exactly 3 days before departure. Yet he still submitted the full per diem, flight insurance, and cancellation fees, claiming they were critical client retention costs. The parallel truth was buried in the microtransactions that Jack, in his arrogance, must have dismissed as insignificant. Mixed among the fake flight charges were localized fuel payments, extravagant receipts from high-end jewelers, and, most damningly, recurring restaurant, spa, and wine bills, all traced to one specific area in a neighboring state. The location's primary vendor appeared over and over again, the Gilded Kin. The GPS data confirmed the cycle of deceit. He wasn't flying across the country. He was driving 40 miles away to his secret life. This wasn't an affair. It was a sustained, monetized, and highly profitable operation spanning over 6 months. The total fraudulent expenses easily exceeded $45,000, every cent billed directly to Innovate. This wasn't just infidelity. It was felony-level corporate fraud. My investigation expanded to Susan's role. Her complicity was immediately evident in Jack's shared corporate calendar. Susan Miller, travel companion/analyst, appeared next to every canceled flight, every conference, every coinciding hotel stay. She was not a passive participant, but an active, knowing accomplice, directly benefiting from the deception. I copied everything, the GPS data, fraudulent expense reports, flight cancellations, keylogger logs, and stored them on my encrypted drive, labeling the file Project Phoenix. My focus was absolute. I was no longer a wife. I was a forensic architect building the blueprint for total professional annihilation. The final, crucial piece of evidence came from the keylogger, a high-resolution scan of the signed and notarized merger agreement for Innovate's multi-million-dollar acquisition. The metadata and GPS logs showed it was signed and notarized at the Gilded Kin on a Tuesday afternoon, a flagrant violation of corporate protocol that jeopardized the entire deal's legality. The betrayal was now institutional. I needed to move before Jack or his co-conspirator realized what I had uncovered. I began securing the inn's legal structure. Leveraging my professional network, I called in favors from former colleagues in municipal planning and real estate law, posing the request as part of a complex zoning and acquisition case for a demanding client. It gave me both cover and urgency to file a formal inquiry for the property and corporate records of the Gilded Kin. The process was cold, efficient, and irreversible. Then came the revelation that froze me completely. My father, a retired attorney, had written a clause into our prenup, one addressing material financial deceit, intended to protect me from a situation far less catastrophic than this. The pain of Jack's betrayal was eclipsed by a deeper, colder fury, realizing Susan wasn't just a lapse in judgment, but a financial partner and co-conspirator in corporate crime. I moved swiftly into Phase 3, exposing their collusion and elevating it to a criminal matter. Using my firm's official letterhead and my professional credentials, I filed a formal, detailed request to the state registry for property and ownership records under the guise of due diligence for a high-value commercial acquisition. The justification was flawless, plausible, authoritative, and airtight. When I received the records, the truth hit like a physical blow. The LLC that owned the Gilded Kin wasn't some intricate offshore entity. It was a simple 3-person partnership. One of the names stared back at me with brutal finality, sending a sharp jolt of electricity through my chest, confirming the full, nauseating depth of the conspiracy. Susan Miller, my former best friend, the woman I'd held through job losses and broken relationships, was not merely a participant. She was a principal owner and a direct financial beneficiary tied to the exact physical site of the affair. This was not a fleeting, desperate mistake. It was a cold, calculated, long-term business scheme engineered for profit. She was knowingly renting the Willow Suite to Jack, deliberately funneling the fraudulent Innovate funds straight into her investment property and personal accounts. The Gilded Cage was literally her revenue-generating co-conspiracy, structured to maximize deceit and ongoing profit at my expense. The realization crystallized my plan for total destruction. I understood immediately the power of public opinion in dismantling a white-collar crime on this scale, and I set the external media strategy in motion without hesitation. I placed one final, anonymous, surgically subtle call to a prominent New York real estate and financial journalist, a contact I'd cultivated. I have highly credible, documented information that the Gilded Cage is tied to a massive ongoing corporate fraud scheme at Innovate involving a high-level executive and one of the inn's co-owners, I whispered, providing verifiable details, the unusual notary seal, the large recurring expense totals, the specific account numbers, and directives to examine corporate service contracts and LLC ownership. This is existential for Innovate. The journalist, sensing a career-defining front-page scoop, committed instantly. I ended the call abruptly, leaving an invisible, precisely controlled countdown of external pressure. Next, I drove to the Gilded Cage. On a slow Tuesday afternoon, I presented my state architectural license, my ID, and a fabricated but authoritative inspection warrant to the nervous clerk. We've received structural integrity concerns regarding the main wing. This is an emergency review, I said, projecting absolute professional urgency. I need the original blueprints, property deeds, and all internal service contracts for the Willow Suite immediately for assessment. Intimidated by the official seal and my unflinching demeanor, the young clerk handed over a large, dusty binder. I wasn't there for floor plans. I wanted legal proof. Inside the documents, I found the faint, distinct imprint of the inn's proprietary notary seal, the exact unique seal that authenticated Jack's crucial multi-million-dollar merger papers. I removed a small clay impression kit I had purchased for this precise moment and, within seconds, obtained undeniable three-dimensional evidence. The merger's final, critical corporate document had been signed and notarized at his mistress's establishment, witnessed by her own agent. It was a catastrophic, legally indefensible compromise of the entire deal, evidence that would not only ruin Jack but force Innovate to abandon him to protect their multi-million-dollar interests. Jack had no idea I'd uncovered Susan's financial stake in the inn and that I'd already engaged my father, a brilliant, ruthless corporate attorney, to trigger a hidden, lethal clause in my seldom-read prenuptial agreement, the final, absolute mechanism ensuring his immediate and unavoidable financial collapse. With irrefutable proof of corporate fraud, a felony-level legal compromise, and a meticulously documented business conspiracy secured, I moved at once into Phase 4, the legal siege. My emotions had been fully supplanted by cold, flawless execution. I contacted my father on my secure, encrypted phone. His contact name appeared innocuously as Client Boston. "Dad," I said, "the strategic window is open and the evidence is overwhelming. Activate the prenup. Immediate enforcement. Full stop. The divorce filings go in tomorrow morning." He asked for no details about the hurt. The hard, precise tone in my voice conveyed urgency. "Mary Jane," he replied, "the final delivery will be simultaneous with your instruction. We need a process server confirmed, fully briefed, and on standby for 8 p.m. this Friday. The element of surprise is non-negotiable." The prenup Jack had signed years earlier, at the height of his toxic financial hubris, was my most potent weapon, the impregnable architectural defense of my legacy that my father had methodically constructed. The devastating clause now active was uncompromising. Any discovery of marital misconduct, including infidelity or financial impropriety leading to divorce, entitled me, Mary Jane Thompson, to the entire marital home, immediate sole residential custody of our daughter Eliza, and full reimbursement, with substantial penalties and punitive interest, of any marital or corporate funds misappropriated in the commission of the misconduct. Jack's colossal ego and his naive certainty of invincibility had blinded him to the document's perfectly fatal clauses. He truly believed the house was a negotiable marital asset and that the prenup was a mere formality. He was catastrophically, irreparably wrong. While my father's elite legal team quietly began the sealed filing process with the court, paperwork prepared and waiting for execution, I enacted a complete, irreversible financial lockdown. I moved Eliza's entire college fund, all my liquid assets, and my investment portfolio into separate, protected trusts held under my mother's name. I systematically cut Jack off from every shared investment account and canceled primary credit cards, leaving him only a single, temporary, limited emergency corporate card, an enticement I knew he would squander in a final brazen attempt to flee justice. Susan, now raging with the reckless bravado of criminals who think they've escaped detection, called not to apologize but to boast about a promotion and an extravagant celebratory trip with Jack to the Maldives. "You really should take a long vacation, Mary Jane," she purred, patronizing and insincere. "You're looking terribly stressed." Jack says the merger wore everyone out, especially those partners who carried the load, she added. "That sounds lovely, Susan," I replied, my voice smooth, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I truly hope the corporate-funded trip is everything you both dreamed of and more." She interpreted my icy detachment as collapse and allowed arrogance to swell. It became the perfect fuel for what came next. The moment she hung up, I called Harold Vance's executive assistant and demanded an urgent, high-level corporate integrity review of Susan Miller's travel and expense records related to the merger, ensuring her name would be formally flagged in the impending internal fraud audit and sealing her professional and financial fate alongside Jack's in one public ruin. The phase of silent, meticulous preparation was over. Open, coordinated warfare had arrived. Phase 5, the corporate execution, commenced. My legal, financial, and media campaigns were poised to converge in a single devastating strike. I bypassed administrative layers and rang Harold Vance directly on his private secure line at Innovate. "Harold, it's Mary Jane. The 3 weeks of mandated silence are up. The final audited report is ready for action," I said, my tone a professional, non-negotiable command. "I require an immediate, irrevocable termination notice and the official fraud investigation documentation for Jack Thompson and Susan Miller. Hard copies must be delivered by private anonymous courier, sealed and addressed to the process server's name and location by 7 p.m. this Friday." Vance sounded defeated, morally drained, and perfectly compliant. "The board has signed off," he said. "You're saving the company tens of millions and preventing a catastrophic scandal. Your demands are met." I had supplied the legal escape hatch and the evidence to protect them. My precise demands were the uncompromising price of cooperation and silence. He gave absolute verbal and written assurance that the termination would be instantaneous and irreversible, citing gross ethical misconduct, corporate malfeasance, and the legal vulnerability of the acquisition. I accelerated the media fallout. I sent a final anonymous, highly detailed tip to the New York financial journalist. Audited fraud figures, the exact notary impression, corporate emails exposing the conspiracy, and a devastating dossier on Susan Miller. I guaranteed the story would break globally on the Monday after the dinner, ensuring Jack's public destruction would be rapid, absolute, and unavoidable, erasing any hope of a graceful exit or future employment. The stage for the final confrontation was immaculately set. I planned the Friday night dinner. The moment the legal filings would activate and the termination documents would be en route. I called it a merger celebration and insisted Jack invite Susan. "It's a testament to your hard work and success, Jack," I cooed, pulling him into one last embrace, a final deadly gesture of feigned intimacy. Consumed by his enormous, desperate ego, He couldn't refuse the chance to parade his double life one last time before what he assumed would be his triumph. The final execution mechanism had been refined to perfection. I hired a specialized AV technician under the pretense of installing a complex hidden home theater system for our daughter. In truth, he fitted an immaculate hidden wireless link that mirrored my secure laptop directly to the 60-inch dining room television, ensuring the visual proof of their betrayal would be blown up large, crystal clear, and utterly incontrovertible for the final public reveal. Every variable from lighting to screen latency was accounted for. I finalized the coded instruction to the process server. 3 sharp, distinct knocks was the signal. At that sound, he would serve the paperwork instantly and simultaneously, the divorce, the restraining order, and the termination notice, so Jack would have no time to brace himself before the legal and physical expulsion hit with absolute, coordinated force. Friday descended over the Vermont Valley with an almost suffocating stillness. The air inside the house was charged with a quiet, catastrophic tension. Yet Jack arrived annoyingly buoyant, sealed inside his impermeable bubble of delusion. Susan appeared at 7:45 p.m., too sleek, too expensive, radiant in a bright crimson silk dress, an unnecessary extravagance for a home dinner, certain she was attending her coronation. Jack seemed only mildly nervous, his ego keeping his posture rigid. The dinner was to be the catastrophic finale of their 6-month performance, a performance I was finally ready to end. The dining room smelled of expensive, aging Cabernet and my concentrated, acidic tension. Susan and Jack traded the practiced, intimate glances of conspirators, unaware that their silent language was the thin, final sound before collapse. I poured the wine and watched them with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a self-inflicted experiment. Jack avoided my eyes. Susan, intoxicated by certainty and wine, began to dominate the narrative. Honestly, Jack, that weekend going over the final projections was existentially critical, she sighed dramatically, as if to justify her salary with noble sacrifice. She corrected herself with a patronizing smile aimed at me. I mean, that extra weekend at the office was so draining, Mary Jane. I barely slept, but it was necessary to secure the deal. Jack chimed in, too loud and too eager, glancing at me for validation. Very intense, Mary Jane. We had to be discreet about the final signing and its location. I know exactly how intense those weekends must have been, I said, setting the heavy Cabernet bottle down on the marble sideboard with a deliberate, resounding clack. My voice cut through the room with surgical calm, especially at the Gilded Cage's Willow Suite. I hear the private reservoir view is simply marvelous for those discreet strategy meetings. Do they serve a decent vintage of Cabernet? The clink of Jack's silverware as it hit his plate echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Color drained from Susan's face. She went from flush to the pallor of wet plaster. They froze, finally seeing the trap yawning open. Mary Jane, this is madness. You need help, Jack stammered, panic replacing arrogance.
No, Jack.
I'm finishing a high-risk project you started, I replied, and with that I touched my phone and activated the mirror. The security footage, time-stamped and perfectly sharp, erupted on the 60-inch screen, Jack and Susan hand in hand entering the Willow Suite, the notarized document, the entire sequence of their affair and the business conspiracy, magnified and undeniable. Jack lunged across the table, chair scraping backward, desperate for the remote. Too late, I said, voice rising with cold, unassailable authority. Mr. Vance at Innovate has the full audited report. He knows about the $45,000 in fraudulent expenses. He knows the merger document you signed is legally vulnerable because it was executed at your mistress's inn. As of 5 p.m. today, you are terminated for cause. You are a corporate and criminal liability. Jack was on the verge of realizing that losing his marriage was only the professional prelude to his total destruction. The final, total, irreversible phase of his destruction began with 3 sharp, loud, authoritative knocks on the front door, precise to the minute. The climax was engaged, a devastating cascade of financial, legal, and personal collapse. Susan, Suddenly distraught and realizing the financial death of her investment, lunged backward, clawing at my phone in a frantic attempt to smash it and blind the television. Jack stood frozen for a moment, the damning footage looping before him, the paralyzing magnitude of his corporate exposure finally registering as absolute, unchangeable reality. "You have no right. That's my money. Our money. You can't take my life from me," Jack roared, breaking out of his stupor and charging toward me, his executive suit now draping a man reduced to raw, desperate animalistic fury. He stopped short at the invisible property line I had drawn in my head. "It was Innovate's money, Jack," I corrected, keeping a safe, calculated distance near the entrance hall. "Your employment contract demanded ethical conduct, which you flagrantly violated. Look around. My father's ironclad prenup ensures this is my protected property, purchased with my inheritance. As of 8 p.m. tonight, you are trespassing on private property." The doorbell rang 3 deliberate times, the prearranged, unavoidable signal. I walked to the door and opened it to reveal a large, impassive process server holding 3 thick stacks of official documents bound with red tape. "Jack Thompson?" the server asked, his voice flat with formal authority in the stunned hush of the great hall. Jack stumbled to the threshold, eyes flitting uselessly between my face and the server's seals, attempting to plead. The man remained an immovable wall of professional neutrality. "You have been served," he intoned with grim finality. "First, divorce papers invoking the prenup's immediate financial enforcement. Second, a temporary restraining order mandating your immediate, supervised removal from the premises. Third, formal notification of the Innovate corporate fraud investigation and your irrevocable termination, effective 5 p.m. today." Hearing termination, fraud, and irrevocable together, Susan finally grasped the full extent of the financial ruin she'd engineered. Her investment stripped of value, her job gone, her reputation in tatters. She turned on Jack, shrieking in selfish, frantic betrayal. "You promised me. You said she couldn't touch your assets. You lied about your net worth. You guaranteed me the Maldives." Jack, stripped of control and facing total ruin, redirected his fury at her. "You ruined my life by being greedy and demanding luxury. You left a paper trail. You should have known better than to mix business with this." They consumed each other in a last, bitter eruption, the most satisfying structural demolition I had ever authorized. "Get out of my house, Susan," I ordered, pointing sharply toward the exit. "And Jack, you have 90 minutes. Your essential clothing will be packed by the moving crew. Everything else goes into climate-controlled storage. The keys to the moving truck are with the server." Susan fled immediately. Her heels clicked a frantic, final retreat across the cobblestones. Jack remained, defeated and disgraced in his formal suit, offering one last, pathetic appeal for mercy. "Mary Jane, think of Eliza. You can't take me away from my daughter. I'll fight you on custody. You'll have supervised access, twice a month for 1 hour, by court order," I said, my voice absolute and unyielding. "That is all you have left, and it is non-negotiable." The process server then handed me a small, final, sealed envelope, the notarized deed transferring the house into my name, signed and sealed that very morning by my father, the legal instrument ensuring Jack had no claim to the property and cementing my immediate and complete victory. The fallout from the triple service was swift, brutal, and absolute. Jack's attempts to challenge the prenup were promptly dismissed by the court and crushed by my father's legal team. The clause mandating forfeiture of contested non-protected assets left him with no leverage, and he abandoned the fight within 48 hours. The media story I'd planted detonated exactly as planned on Monday. The New York Financial Journalist's front-page exposé ran under the headline "The Executive's Gilded Cage: Corporate Fraud, the Mistress's Inn, and the Multi-Million Merger at Risk." It laid out every detail with clinical precision: the exact $45,000 fraud, Susan's co-ownership of the inn, and the fatal legal vulnerability that jeopardized the entire corporate merger. Jack wasn't merely terminated. He was publicly disgraced across the entire American tech industry, his name forever synonymous with ethical collapse. His severance package was revoked, his stock options frozen for violations of corporate ethics, and he became the subject of a formal criminal investigation for fraud and misrepresentation. Susan's fall was equally catastrophic. She lost her position. Her investment in the inn imploded overnight, and she was forced into personal bankruptcy, stripped of both income and reputation. My personal failure had been fully converted into my professional triumph. Reeling from the fallout and desperate to protect their public image, Innovate's board called me directly. Harold Vance's voice carried an unfamiliar mixture of respect and unease. "Mary Jane," he said, "your forensic precision saved us hundreds of millions in potential liability and preserved our legal standing. The board has approved an unprecedented offer, a permanent consultancy, multi-million-dollar annual contract to oversee all future real estate acquisitions, risk assessments, and due diligence reviews. You'll serve as our chief integrity architect, reporting directly to the board." It was corporate karmic justice at its purest. My modest landscape design business was instantly reborn as a global consulting powerhouse, funded by the very company Jack had tried to defraud. I accepted, but on one condition. I require unrestricted executive access to Innovate's full server infrastructure, including historical HR and financial data, to ensure secure acquisition architecture and continuous data integrity. The clause granted me complete oversight, the authority to monitor any future attempt by Jack or Susan to re-enter the professional sphere. I had become their silent warden, a highly paid corporate gatekeeper, ensuring their permanent professional exile. Jack had no idea that I now occupied the throne he'd tried to steal, his house, his career, his mistress, all replaced by my name and control. 3 months after the final settlement and divorce decree, the Vermont house stood transformed. Once a monument to betrayal, it had become an architectural testament to light, openness, and resilience. I personally oversaw the demolition of Jack's old, shadow-filled office, the epicenter of his deceit, and replaced it with a soaring 2-story glass conservatory, a structure devoted entirely to growth and illumination. I rebranded my firm as New Foundation Designs, specializing in bespoke architectural transformations for high-net-worth divorce rebuilds. What was once a symbol of loss became a breathing embodiment of recovery, proof that structural integrity could mirror emotional rebirth. With my new wealth and influence from the Innovate contract, I performed one last deliberate act of poetic restitution. Quietly, through a discreet shell company, I tracked the foreclosure of the Gilded Kin, the now toxic property that had collapsed after the public exposure of Susan's ownership and its ties to corporate fraud. When it went to bankruptcy auction, I acquired it anonymously for a fraction of its original value. Then, without ceremony, I transferred the deed, free of charge, to a local nonprofit dedicated to providing long-term housing, legal support, and financial rehabilitation for women escaping abuse and coercion. I renamed the property the Sanctuary. The site of deception and exploitation was reborn as a place of protection, empowerment, and rebirth, a direct, tangible reversal of the harm Jack and Susan had inflicted on me and others like me. Months later, I received one final email from Jack, a pitiful, rambling plea claiming destitution, accusing me of violating his parental rights, begging for mercy. I didn't respond. I simply forwarded it to my father and Innovate Security Division, marking it as harassment evidence for his permanent corporate record. It ensured his professional unemployability forever. By then, the legal system had severed all remaining emotional ties. I no longer operated from bitterness or vengeance, but from clarity and structural equilibrium. I had analyzed the threat, calculated the precise countermeasure, and executed the perfect design, not just for survival, but for total and enduring triumph. I had protected my daughter and secured my financial future without compromising my ethical foundation. The most deeply satisfying thought was the profound realization that I was the true executive, the ultimate architect of my own life. Jack was nothing more than a failed, structurally unsound project, one I had efficiently terminated and repurposed, converting the wreckage into something far greater and socially meaningful. 6 months after the divorce was finalized and the legal aftermath concluded, my life had become a personal and professional masterpiece of my own design. A structure of enduring success that exceeded every expectation of my previous existence. I was profoundly successful, financially invulnerable, and genuinely, deeply happy. I sat in my new sun-drenched conservatory, sipping my morning coffee, watching Eliza thrive at school and at home, carefully tending to vibrant ferns and flowering plants. The sun poured through the glass, bright, honest, and unshadowed by deceit. The air was clean, scented with damp earth and the promise of growth. My consulting business expanded rapidly, fueled by the high-profile Innovate contract and my reputation as a ruthless, highly effective integrity expert. I purchased a vintage cherry red convertible, a visible emblem of freedom and forward motion, and drove Eliza to school each morning, feeling the crisp, invigorating Vermont air, untainted by the stale, suffocating fog of Jack's deceit. "Mommy," Eliza said, looking up from her watering can, her eyes reflecting the honest sunlight without fear or confusion, "is Daddy happy now that he is to live in that small apartment and sell used cars at the highway lot?" I smiled, a genuine, deep, and satisfied smile that reached my eyes. "I don't know, honey," I replied, meeting her gaze with honesty and compassion. "But we're safe. We have a new foundation, and this home is a sanctuary we built just for us. The boundaries are clear now, protected by law and by our choices." The innocent question that had shattered my marriage became the final load-bearing support of my absolute freedom. I realized that a man who couldn't respect the simple boundary of a closed shower door could never respect the complex boundaries of marriage, family, or business. I had not merely divorced Jack. I had declared him structurally unsound, executed the necessary demolition, and replaced the failing connection with a structure of superior, self-designed integrity. My life was not a tragedy. It was a victorious construction project that showcased my ultimate skill. I had neutralized the threat, cleared the rot, repurposed the damaged property, and built something stronger, more beautiful, and entirely my own. I had become a better mother, a better architect, a better woman. Unbreakable. I closed my laptop, the screen displaying the finalized seven-figure financial statements for new foundation designs alongside the annual report for the sanctuary, the nonprofit I now funded and personally oversaw. I had transformed the most painful personal betrayal into the greatest professional and personal triumph imaginable. I gazed at the brilliant autumn foliage, no longer seeing deception, only the robust, enduring beauty of a world I had successfully navigated, secured, and reshaped entirely on my own terms. I had achieved a rare, complete victory, one that was not only sweet and total, but profoundly constructive. A true masterwork of self-reclamation.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.